Welcome back to the Reliably Intermittent Podcast, episode, I think we just hit double digits. Is this 10?
I believe so.
Awesome. And who better to come back than all kinds of returning hosts, co-hosts, podcast providers extraordinaire. Back with us again is Drew Esposito. Drew, how you doing?
Doing good. A little tired this week, but I'll bring the energy. I got a good story for you guys.
Looking forward to it. And then Heidi Miller back again.
Yep.
How we doing?
Good. How are you guys?
Just living that dream.
That's right.
I know. I just keep turning the camera around in this room because furniture just keeps moving around my house. It's just a nightmare.
Yeah. I don't want us to throw all of our pep out immediately when we start here. But no, I think this week we're going to do another instance of we'll call it this week in HR, employees behaving badly, whatever you want to call it, because it's kind of a hybrid.
Yeah.
Drew, why don't you take it from me here?
So I had an employee who was getting called in on an emergency call. Here in the Midwest, here in Ohio, especially Northeast Ohio, snow gets awful. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, they got hit with like 2 feet of snow in one dumping. When down here in Columbus, we just got a little dusting. But someone was responding to an emergency call. So the all call in, it was 2-3 in the morning. Snowplow driver, so CDL holder. He blows a red light, gets pulled over by the local PD. PD smells alcohol, charges him with an OVI, and finds a loaded gun in his glove compartment. So this is someone who's not leaving work, right? Like they didn't come, they were at a bar, leaving a bar, coming to work. They could have just not answered their phone. They would have got dinged, right? Because they were on call. But he was about to plow the roads of this community, 3 sheets to the wind.
Plowed.
Yeah, plowed, quite literally.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not here to talk about the discipline side of it. What this brought up was something that really isn't something I'm that familiar with at all. Right? Everyone has gotten into the alphabet soup of HR, the FMLA, the ADA, the FLSA, et cetera, et cetera. But this brought up a whole new wrinkle of reporting requirements, options for employers on investigating their CDL employees and things like that. Something that I don't think my clients utilize at all, and something that rarely comes up, at least across my radar. Maybe my clients just aren't using it. I don't know, but I've got a lot of clients with CDL holders, so I'm surprised this wasn't on my radar. Then I reached out internally, and Heidi brought up this clearinghouse, and for the life of me, it's the first time I've heard of this. So what the heck is this CDL clearinghouse? Is it new? How long has it been around, I guess? Explain it.
So it is new. It did go into effect January 6th of 2020. I honestly think that it got probably a little overshadowed with all of the COVID related issues and policies that we were all dealing with. But basically it's a database where employers will go to the database for their future employees to see if they've had any drug or alcohol violations. And then they also go there for reporting purposes for their current employees. They also have to do, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, these limited inquiries on their current employees every year. Now, this is something that, like you've already said, this is for our employers who have CDL holders. And I'm trying to think, there's so many parts to this. I told you guys already, just trying to keep it broad, I guess. But basically,
well, is it kind of like, so I remember for my CDL clients, all this used to be like, just like a paper driven process.
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, okay. So a lot of it. Okay.
Well, and the thing so what's going to be nice is it's going to take, I think it's 2023 that they expect to kind of have this completely rolled out, because it's going to take that long to kind of build this database. But, right now, if somebody is hiring a CDL holder, they have to go back to their previous employers for the last 2 years.
Mhm.
So if somebody's had multiple jobs in those 2 years, I mean, that's a lot of work, and that could certainly be a time-consuming process. So it's going to eventually make the whole process easier, because by 2023, this will essentially take the place of that process. So right now they have to double up on their efforts, but eventually they'll get to the point where they're just using the clearinghouse.
So let's say like if you probably have less than 100 employees,
Mm-hmm.
you may have a one person HR department.
Correct.
Maybe, maybe two, but often likely you don't. So that so right now they need to go, and if someone had like 5 previous employers, that HR person or whoever's responsible for hiring has to track down the phone numbers and all that for all of those people for the past 2 years.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's the fun part, right, Heidi? That obligation to look into the history is an existing requirement, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the fun part where, like Drew was saying, how many times, Drew, have we run into situations where we've got a call, like I got, you got your call, although mine's nowhere near as entertaining and salacious. Mine's just garden variety. So-and-so backed the snowplow truck into another city vehicle. We send them out for the test, and employee calls and says, "Oh, by the way, boss, I'm going to test positive. Just wanted to self-report the issue."
Mm-hmm.
As again, another example that we get this so many ways. We probably get this issue more than all, but I'd say this is probably one of the more common issues we get a call on, right? Drug test questions
Oh yeah, especially if you're
with
above
CDL holders.
if you're above the Ohio's Mason-Dixon line, right, the line across Columbus,
Yeah.
right, going north, and you're getting a little bit of snow, especially for 4 months of the year when really that's all that some of these places do is plow snow for a good 25% of the year.
But how many times has this notion that, oh, we need to be looking into new hires, but more importantly, our existing people? I've not gotten that question once. So Heidi,
Ever.
like, if that's an existing requirement, kind of they're running this parallel track now, are they going to be able to use that clearinghouse for the next 2 years while they're also looking into the way they were supposed to be doing it?
Well, I think that's the goal. I think one of the things that I want to touch on, because we were talking about, your HR person or the person that is supposed to do the reporting. So with this clearinghouse, the employer is supposed to designate a clearinghouse administrator. So it doesn't have to be a new employee, but it has to be somebody that is designated, that is familiar with this process, that's going to run all of the inquiries, that's going to do all of the reporting. So I think that's an important piece of this, is that they are going to be required to designate somebody to do this and to kind of become the expert on this process for the employer.
So employers are going to roll out these people probably like an assignment, same thing as if you like assign someone like your EEO coordinator, or if you have a state version of OSHA or a public sector version of a same risk pool. There's a lot of times like a person who's assigned the administrator of their public safety for getting the necessary workers' comp training and OSHA standards, PowerPoints, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yep. And then to kind of touch on what Aaron was just saying, is that there's going to be 2 type of inquiries. There's a limited one, which I kind of briefly talked about, but basically that's checking in on your current employees each year. And then there is, and I guess this is also another important piece, to do the limited inquiries, there is kind of like a one-time consent form that the employees are going to have to complete that will be kept in their file. But then there's also these full inquiries. So if something would come up in the limited one, they would have to do a full inquiry. If new hires, they obviously would have to do a full one. So for a full one, they have to get a consent form each time. So that that one-time form wouldn't work for that type of inquiry. So that's another important piece to all of that.
I think you may have said this. So this started January of this year,
Yep.
but what's the period of time? I guess if I'm a procrastinating employer, when is my drop dead? Like, when do I have to have stuff in place to comply with this new law with the reporting to the clearinghouse?
So they need to be reporting now, basically. So as
Oh,
of January 6th.
They got to start doing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this needs to start happening.
Okay.
And it does require like setting up an online account and, all of those things as well.
Okay.
So.
Is there anywhere that for the procrastinators in our audience, is there any kind of helpful link or guidance where they could go perhaps get a step-by-step process to figure out how to log in and create this account if they haven't already done so?
So they can go to the FMCSA. I think even if you Google search it, you're going to find a lot of information on their website. I know that's certainly where I started when I was looking into all of this. The other thing that's extremely important is that all of the employers are going to have a policy on this. So something that they can give to their employees to kind of outline all of this, let them know that there are these consent forms that they have to complete and the requirements. And then, of course, what happens if, one of these come back where something has shown up in their report, kind of what happens then. So that's certainly an important piece to this as well.
I think that's a logical place to go.
Yeah.
So Drew's gun-toting plowman, what is it that comes of something like that once you've theoretically, as the prudent non-procrastinating employer, you've got your account set up. What do you do with that information?
Are you asking me?
Yes, please.
Sorry. Sorry, I thought you were talking. That's it.
I'm not going to take it.
That was a perfect moment for me. So you have to repeat that because I totally zoned out because I thought it was for Drew.
No. So we've got our plowman.
Okay, I gotcha.
City knows what happened. City obviously we've got a failed test because they declined to take the test essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the city, county, whomever this is, what do they do? At this point, any employer really.
Oh, and let's say failed test because they actually failed it. I found out recently that a refusal to take, or I guess it's not a refusal. I have another guy with a CDL who in February got in a head-on collision drunk, and he ran from the scene, but he kept his CDL. Like,
Okay.
they didn't do one of those administrative license suspensions because there was no test to refuse.
Okay.
Crazy.
So we've got the situation with the plowman.
Mm-hmm.
What does the employer do in that circumstance?
So if they're refusing, that also gets reported as well. And then that's going to be handled through the discipline process as normal. But when it gets reported though, and if they want to, let's say they get terminated because they've refused, their next employer is then going to look at this and see that, hey, they refused to take a test.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing. I thought of something else, but it would be the same thing for a positive test as well.
If
Sure.
If I find out about it, and this one we may not know the answer to, if there's a positive test, but it's like a criminal case and the person hasn't been proven guilty, do we know yet what the reporting requirements are for that? Or do we leave that up to kind of how the court handles it? The court makes an administrative license suspension that gets shifted to whatever your Bureau of Motor Vehicles and they handle the reporting? Or do we know if the employer has some sort of reporting process for like a pending case?
That I honestly don't know.
Okay. That's something we'll have to look at.
Yeah.
And
I mean, just like normal too, if somebody has a positive test and they go through the motions of, using an SAP, kind of trying to, I can't think of what I'm trying to say, doing like a follow-up testing plan, basically.
treatment, all that good
if
stuff.
they go through that process, that's also reported. So then that way, if a new employer would look back, they can also see that they took the steps to correct the behavior, basically.
Well, and Drew alluded to this a little bit earlier in terms of how this kind of information, I guess, can be used in that practical aspect of the investigation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but once we have that positive test, refusal to test, an alcohol confirmed test, an adulterated sample, because I just got one of those where somebody went in to test, they had to, quote, stop by their house on the way to get their driver's license for the test. For those of you listening, I'm using air quotes. That they then went to take the test, and magically the sample came up not warm enough to test within the bounds of the urinalysis temperature gauge. So you get one of these tests. Correct me if I'm wrong.
They need to pee into a Yeti. store that urine at a nice warm temperature.
So true.
But the employer then can't use that person for a safety sensitive function using their CDL, right? At least until they get through.
Correct. Go through the process.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got a situation where essentially all of these jobs, we don't have superfluous CDL requirements 99.9% of the time. Drew, can we even use that person at this point?
No chance. I think there's a liability if you do. I mean, it's certainly negligent if you're letting them continue to operate under what's likely a suspended license. If it hasn't been suspended because of some technicality, like my other employer who had the guy run from the scene, my client was like, do I let this guy drive a car? He technically still has his CDL, but he was just in a head-on collision where the victim had to get life flighted and he ran from the scene. Right. There's felonies across the board. If this guy gets in an accident on duty at another time, right? I knew about the other accident. And I get that he still had the CDL because of this weird loophole. I would not be comfortable advising my clients. I'd say it's probably negligent. If the license has been suspended and you know it, it's not just negligent, it's reckless, right? I mean, that's even a higher standard.
Well, and you've got your operator's license and you've got your CDL component too. I mean, there's different components. There's different minimum qualifications for a given job. But if you got a heavy equipment operator, let's take it out of the plowman. Let's just go into just everyday, heavy equipment operator for a general contractor or
backhoes,
for a laborer, street maintenance worker type situation. That you have to report that test, right, Heidi?
Yeah. Which
then until they get through that plan, they're just completely not functional for the job they were hired to do.
Exactly. And I think, the FMCSA Clearinghouse is strictly your database, and it's there for reporting purposes and for you to make those inquiries. Everything else, as far as, the policies, what to do if somebody has a positive test or refusal to test or any of that, is still the same.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Because this is just basically, hey, we got John Smith, positive test.
Exactly.
Failure to blow, lukewarm pee, those situations.
Yeah.
This is that we're reporting that.
Exactly.
On that
but everything
dual path.
else. Yep. Everything's still handled the same though from there.
Okay.
Just a new process.
So something I don't think we talked about, but I think might be relevant. So if, again, the procrastinating employer, is there a time frame within which you have to get your existing employees like those inquiries you were talking about? Is there a time frame for that?
I believe I'm looking at my notes here. I want to say I thought it was 3 days to do the reporting. And of course I'm trying to find it and I can't, but.
So they have 3 days to report when they become aware of an issue, or we're thinking that's.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find that.
That's definitely tight, a very tight timeline. I just can't believe, from a hiring perspective, I can't believe I haven't heard of this, of more people using it. It's just a wealth of data, and the hardest thing to do is to hire the right person. So why you're not utilizing every tool in your tool shed, I have no idea. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it-
So,
like if-
okay. So to answer, it was 3 business days, but basically what they have to report in 3 business days, to be clear, is if there's like a positive alcohol test, a negative return to duty, a refusal to take an alcohol test, or basically a refusal to take any test. And then also that they've done all of their follow-up testing. So those are the things that have to be reported within 3 days.
okay.
Okay.
So on the inquiry side, if we have a situation where we've got an employer who hasn't been doing their inquiries, they didn't do their new hire one, or they haven't been doing their annual checks, is there a time frame that they have to do that?
So, I mean, they do need to do those, but there isn't a set time during the year
Okay.
that they have to do that, if that makes sense. So they just have to make sure they're doing it on a regular 1-year schedule.
So
Okay.
probably if they haven't done it ever,
It needs to be done.
go do it.
Exactly.
And then put that in your calendar tickler to
Exactly.
remind you around that same time next year.
Yep. Yep. And of course, the easiest thing is typically to do it, January, but it depends on what they've got going on as well. So
Yeah, if they're out there plowing, maybe.
exactly.
Well, and that helps. That's where you get into who's the right person to be your administrator, right? Somebody who has the time. Like we run into a lot of smaller employers where you've got dual role, fiscal HR people that maybe January or December doesn't make a ton of sense because you're doing year-end budgeting or closing out the books or getting the new year started. So they can pick a different time that makes sense for them depending on who their administrator is.
Yep. Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see just before winter hits
Yeah.
being a good time for a lot of places, because if you're talking about CDL people, you're usually talking about, your blue collar jobs, your tradesmen. So a lot of that work all comes to a screeching halt, right? There's no more paving, there's no more curb work, sewer lines aren't being installed, exterior painting isn't being done because the temp, so there's this lull in the areas of the country that have 4 seasons. There's this lull of work that gets done from the maintenance standpoint for usually CDL people, because they're, like you're saying, it's heavy equipment. It's not like a typical maintenance person doing interior plumbing and light switches and stuff like that. They usually don't have a CDL. But I was shocked when this came up and was like, oh, this came up in January and no one has brought this up. And in that time, I've had these 2 serious CDL holder, both alcohol related incidents. And
now it's another tool or arrow in your quiver, tool in your tool chest, what have you, on that practical side of sitting down with somebody to have that uncomfortable conversation, the Monty Hall game that we have to have from time to time of saying, hey, by the way, historically we could go in and say, for our public employers, we know what happened, what happened, go away, and this doesn't become a situation. What it sounds like to me is with that 3-day reporting requirement that is now in place, we can't have that conversation anymore. Our obligation to report to the clearinghouse is there regardless. While you were an employee, the test occurred, the refusal, the whatever, that we have to report that now. So now we're just talking about how can we facilitate the end of your employment, more than likely, in a way that's the only thing that goes out there. I mean, that it's going to be difficult for any employee that has a CDL now to, how do I put this in a way that doesn't sound like we're just greasy and try to hide things, escape a drug test anymore or an alcohol test. I mean, historically that has been part of the discussion. It's been the discussion with law enforcement, like all summer, with how people are allowed to resign and go work for other places. That doesn't sound like it's going to happen anymore.
No.
Yeah. And I don't think it's, I mean, I honestly, like you said, I don't think it's greasy. It's like when it comes to employment, like there's not an HR professional that I know or an employer that I know that enjoys terminations, right? And there's also not one that wants to keep around a bad actor.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be cognizant. Like, I don't want to, necessarily compare it, but like the termination is the equivalent of the death penalty. So, like, if you got a 35-year-old man or woman and they did something terrible, all right, and you're gonna let them go, or it was a one-off, right? Like a honest mistake, or maybe this person was an alcoholic and they could get help. If you can avoid that termination by protecting your agency and not putting a black stain on this person's employment jacket for the rest of their life, like that's how I look at it. I don't see it as us trying to sweep stuff under the rug. Like, I want people to work. You may not want to be working for my client, but if you get your act together, and you had a DUI or whatever when you were 21 and now you're 35, like, I don't want that keeping you out of the workforce. Like, you could have turned your whole life around. So that's, now if they're a bad actor and they're not showing any mitigating factors, I don't think we have a lot of obligation to like do them a solid by trying to keep their jacket relatively clean. I also think HR professionals, if you are doing your job and you call these references and the person you call and you ask the main question, right? Would you rehire them? Right? Would they, or are they eligible to be rehired? Right? And a lot of HR professionals will answer that question. They may say, we don't give information. We only tell you hire date, wage scale, and their title. But they can answer, are they eligible for rehire? No. Oh, that's a big red flag. If you think someone buried something in a file, that's a great question to ask.
Well, and here's the practical reality coming back to the topic du jour. The employers are prohibited from having someone in that safety sensitive function with all these different tests, right, Heidi?
Yeah.
But there is a period where that person, the CDL holder, the one that took that flunked the test, essentially can then go remedy the issue and get back to work.
Yep, exactly. And then that's going to show that they remedied the issue. So that's going to be reported as well.
Mm-hmm. So it may not be with, incident test, whatever occurs with employer A, that could take 6 months, 9 months, a year. That means they can't work for employer A, but that doesn't necessarily preclude them from going out and finding employment with employer B once they've taken care of the issue and essentially remedied that issue of the positive test or avoided test or whatever.
Yeah, I just think it's important. That's kind of like with nationwide movements for ban the box and stuff. Of like, you got people that have records, people that have mess ups in their life. I'm not telling you give everybody a second chance. I'm just saying I've got lots of clients that have hired people that if you looked at their resume on paper, old school thinking would have been that person should have never gotten an interview because they would have been immediately eliminated. But because of different types of ban the box legislation, they've come across our desk. And I'm saying I would have been guilty of it. Like, I would have weeded them out because I saw this and a red flag came up on their background check so they wouldn't get an interview. And then when you hear the explanation, they end up being a great employee. So you just got to have a 360 approach in the human resource world, right? Nothing's black and white. Your managers may want it black and white, and that's probably the most challenging thing as a human resource advisor is riding the gray area, trying to figure out what's the best move for your client.
Heidi, are we missing anything on this clearinghouse?
I don't think so, because like I said, it's definitely more involved than maybe what we've talked about.
Sure.
So there's a lot of pieces and parts here. But I think we've covered, the broad picture of it. So
I think big takeaways, it's already in effect.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah.
So if you're an employer out there and this is news to you, like it was to me, get in compliance. Part of that compliance is the development of the policy. Part of the compliance is the designation of the administrator.
Yep.
Right? So run through those tasks, get on probably the Department of Transportation website, the federal clearinghouse website that has, I'm sure it has FAQs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do some general basic stuff to start, and then get with the powers that be and get it in place.
And get that policy developed.
Yeah, no time like the present.
Just like anything else out there, employees, in order for you to enforce a policy, employees have to be on notice of it.
Yeah.
And in order to do the things that like Heidi was talking about with the inquiries and the things that require consent, you need to take the foundational steps to get that ready to go before you then go start holding people accountable to it.
Well, this
Yeah,
is a good one where being reactive would be really bad, right? Like, okay, an accident happens. I need to report it within 3 days. I don't have a policy. I don't have an administrator. I don't have anything. I don't have a login.
exactly.
So you're trying to do all this stuff because you have to, but you never did it. So you need to be proactive, right? We're already 11 months, 12 months past your proactive start date. So, it's time to pull up your bootstraps here.
Well, and I would guess too that if the employer has a union, that there's going to have to be discussions with the union as well, which, who knows, but it could be a possibility.
Yeah.
So
Always an interesting wrinkle. All right.
Good stuff.
Any other fun stories that you want to regale us with? Because you seem to have the best stories, Drew. Or are we going to top the plowman?
The plowman. That one was interesting. I'll tell you the other guy who got in the other accident. I will tell you this one just because it was brutal, absolutely brutal. So it was a head-on accident. He's in a truck. The other guy's in like a sedan. I mean, just ruined the car. Blood all over the scene. He's running from the scene. The guy is screaming in his car. We know this because people came out of their houses. This is in rural Ohio. So like the chances of someone being able to hear it, because they're far away. This isn't like in a city street. Yelling for help. So people running from the house are running toward the scene. They pass the employee. They can smell the alcohol on him while they're running past them. Cops come. There's 6 or 7 open empties, and I think a couple fulls in the car. Then he goes to a hospital about an hour and a half or an hour away from the city he actually lives in. The next morning, got a concussion, still reported to work, concussed with a CDL, operating heavy equipment.
Oh.
How about that one?
Well, and I think although salacious and interesting, I think highlights the reason for why a lot of this stuff's in place, right?
Yeah.
It's safety of people. I mean, it's the safety of the public. It's the safety of the individual. It's the safety of others. I mean, we can talk about liability all day, but just at a nuts and bolts practical level, we don't want people dying, in the street because somebody couldn't be bothered to go, you know what? I'm gonna have to take this one on the chin. I've had too many pops. It's 2 a.m.
Yeah. It's the human element, right? This isn't like, it's like you said, like my initial talks about this too. All credit to my client in this situation, because it was like, if you're willing to run from this scene, well, if you get in another serious accident in a just a regular citizen person on the road, a fellow employee, like these guys are operating some serious equipment, gets fatally wounded, and it's your fault. Like, who's to know this guy isn't going to run away? He clearly is just about saving his own skin. So he's like, I don't care what happens criminally. How can I trust this guy to not leave his fellow man? That, like, it really bothered him at this police report that this guy was running from the scene while a guy is screaming for help. And the guy ended up getting life flighted. So like, it wasn't a guy stumbling outside his car with a concussion and you're like, oh, he's fine, I got to get away. It's blood everywhere and the guy doesn't care about him. I mean, it's scary to think that that's going to be one of your employees.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
just in time for the holidays.
Yeah. Happy holidays all. So thank you, Heidi, for coming in and learning us a thing or two.
Yep. I'm glad I was able to show everybody a typical Heidi moment when I zoned out as well. Sorry.
We want to be as authentic as we
Listen,
can.
it was perfect.
On the Reliably Intermittent podcast.
That's right.
Drew?
I always say that too, Heidi, like when you're introducing yourself to someone, how many people go like, "Hi, I'm Drew," and then
Yeah.
before they even say their name, like you've already zoned out.
It's gone.
I was
Yeah.
like, we're just such a narcissistic population that
know.
as soon as I'm done speaking, I don't care what anyone else has to say.
I know. It's awful. Sorry.
To be fair to you, Heidi, you have to sit through how many different times when I'm just pontificating on something, and you've got my verbal cues and ticks down to know, okay, now he's back.
Now I need to pay attention again.
You're right. That is crazy, Aaron.
Well, I missed it today, so.
All right. Well, thank you both. As always, to our viewers and listeners, like, subscribe, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. We've got the YouTube channel. Again, like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell everybody. And until next time, thank you both.
Anytime, brother.
Yep. Thank you.
And signing off and goodbye. We want to thank you again for joining us on the Reliably Intermittent podcast. Now it's time for a bit of a disclaimer. This podcast and all others on this feed are for informational purposes only and not legal advice. No attorney-client relationship is formed by listening to this podcast or any others on the feed. Should you require or want legal advice, we encourage you to reach out to an attorney or statutory legal counsel as the case may be. Thanks again for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.